As a fellow chef of hearty legume-based soups, including the one right there that, in all seriousness, I made for everyone to have in just a bit, who's also myself named Jacob, you might expect me to identify strongly with the patriarch of this week's parsha. But truthfully, I'm much more drawn to Asav as a character, and I find that I'm thoroughly on the side of Team Asav. Since I was a child in day school, I have always been bothered by some of Jacob's behavior in this parsha. Deceiving his brother only to top it by deceiving his father. What kind of Jew behaves this way? What kind of Jacob? But I'm certainly not here to denigrate Jacob, and instead I want to leverage my discomfort with his actions to see if we can instead take Asav more seriously as an inspiration to us and a dugma ishit, a personal example. I want to lift up the Torah of Asav, offered by Parshat Toldot, and consider what we might learn from Asav. To begin with, Parshat Toldot is not per se about Jacob. We get our title from the line in the middle of chapter 25 that terminates the genealogy of Yishmael. Ve'ele Toldot Yitzchak ben Avraham, Avraham holid et Yitzchak. And these are the generations of Isaac, son of Abraham. It was Abraham who sired Isaac. This is an odd, repetitive sentence. It says the same thing twice. We only need the first half of it. Why say Abraham sired Isaac when that is, of course, what it means to call Isaac ben Avraham, the son of Abraham? Furthermore, for my fellow grammar enthusiasts out there, we have unusual syntax of disruptive word order where we get the subject first, whereas normally the verb would come first in Torah. Abraham is moved earlier into the sentence, which puts an emphasis on him as the subject. It was Abraham who sired Isaac. This is obvious, but I think that the verse beats us over the head just a little bit with the emphasis on Abraham to set up that this next cycle of stories is really about who will inherit and transmit the Abrahamic legacy. Isaac has inherited that covenant and assumed the role of patriarch, but the drama of the parsha is who will Isaac pass it on to? That is, who of the boys will be the real inheritor of the Abrahamic legacy? We can read Asav and Jacob's ongoing wrestling as a contest over acquiring and holding that legacy. Who will assume the next patriarch? If we remove our prior knowledge about how this will end, we get the sense that the Torah is intentionally being a little ambiguous about who that inheritor will be. The sale of the birthright, our first real interaction between the twins, merits a closer read to examine the scene and evaluate Jacob's tactics, morally speaking. Asav asks Jacob for some soup. Hal itenina min ha'adom hazeh. Serve me some of that very red stuff. Jacob replies unflinchingly that he will do so only in exchange for Asav's selling his birthright. Asav replies, Hine anochi holech lamut. Listen, I'm about to die. Jacob proceeds to extort Asav for the firstborn rights before he feeds him lentils, a crop that was, by the way, abundantly available at the time in the ancient Near East. Even if we think that Asav is being dramatic or hyperbolic and not about to die, Jacob's response is still appalling. Can we imagine a greater violation of the Abrahamic ethos? Consider the contrast here to the start of Parshat Vayera, where a convalescing Abraham literally jumps up at the opportunity to feed complete strangers. Rabbi Shai Held has proposed that an emphasis on hospitality and generosity of spirit is actually the core of the Abrahamic legacy. And when Abraham's servant is looking for a wife for Isaac and proposes a test, that test, someone who will feed the camels, is to see if someone has that same generosity of spirit to merit joining the Abrahamic family. Jacob, the supposed heir, cannot be bothered to support his own brother, to have that spirit of generosity. If an ill Abraham fed strangers, all the more so a healthy Jacob should feed his own kin, who ironically is only so hungry because he was off getting food for the rest of the family. Understanding what exactly transpires here on a legal level requires clarifying a clever biblical wordplay that pervades our parasha. The word bechorah, firstborn status or birthright, just has one letter different from beracha, blessing. Verse 34 says that this lentils episode is exactly how Asav forfeited his bechorah. By the rules of biblical firstborn inheritance, or primogeniture, a firstborn son inherits double the portion of the younger son. All the other sons will split the remaining assets equally. The Spanish commentator Abarbanel has this in mind when he says that the plainest sense of what's going on says that Jacob is just negotiating about material wealth, about who will inherit Isaac's estate upon his passing. In other words, without that birthright, even if Jacob were only to inherit 1/3 of Isaac's assets, there's nothing that would stop him from carrying on the covenant, the spiritual legacy. I think the Torah is highlighting for readers the profound irony of Jacob obsessing over the literal, legal, material birthright while not really paying attention to the symbolism of that birthright, of what it represents in spirit. Let's turn from Jacob's deceit of his brother to his deceit of his father. If Esav's sale of the birthright were a recognized legal transaction, why would Jacob and Rebekah need to trick Isaac? Why couldn't Jacob just point out that he had the firstborn status? On the one hand, I think Jacob maybe had the decency to be ashamed of himself. He doesn't want to say, by the way, I extorted my brother for some lentils on a matter of life and death. But we should also keep in mind Bechorah and Beracha. Jacob has the Bechorah, the legal status of firstborn, but that doesn't have any bearing on who will inherit the superior Beracha. Asav even makes this distinction, separating the two when he says, Et Bechorati lakach, he already took my birthright, V'hine ata lakach birchati, and now he's also taken my blessing. Asav's under no illusion as to the loss of his firstborn status, but that doesn't bother him. He really cares about the beracha, about the spiritual status, the superior blessing. For decades, Asav has known that he will inherit less than his brother of the estate, half of the assets, and he accepts that. But the minute his brother gets a superior blessing, that's what triggers him. He's a broken man. He begs Isaac, Havracha achat hi lecha, avi barcheni. Do you only have one blessing for me? Father, please bless me. I read this as a gentle and powerful reprimand from Asav. There's surely enough blessing to go around. He doesn't care about the birthright, but he refuses to be deprived of blessing, of his ancestors' spiritual inheritance. If we lower our guards, if we get rid of the fear that we've inherited psychologically from Jacob about how he views his menacing brother, I don't think Asav is menacing in this moment. He lets out a zakah gdola umara, an enormous and bitter cry. I picture a man crying so abjectly that he tastes the bitterness of his own tears in his mouth, sobbing uncontrollably as the Torah directs our sympathies to Asav. He's pathetic, devastated, and heartbroken. I find this juxtaposition quite damning of Jacob. He misses the forest, the immense blessing of perpetuating the Abrahamic covenant in all its uniqueness, for the trees, the considerable material wealth and assets held by his family. He's obsessed over the material when it seems like the spiritual was on the table for him the whole time. We ought to be troubled that Jacob is more concerned with the Bechorah than the Bracha. But I think we need to have some empathy for him. It's so easy to get caught up in the material, mundane world and to forsake spiritual priorities. It's Asav who lets go of the material and refuses to relinquish the spiritual life. So what would it look like for us to learn a little bit from Asav about living lives of spiritual plenty, moving through the world with an eye to maximize our spiritual assets? Asav recognizes that we're called by God not to live lives of material plenty, but spiritual plenty. I'm aware that this charitable reading of Asav is not in line with the mainstream rabbinic opinion. Asav is epitomized as pure evil, The enemies of the Jewish people in each generation, Rome, Christendom, are called Edom. But if we strip away that rabbinic overlay, the Torah has some positive things to say about Asav. Moses reminds Israel in chapter 23 of Deuteronomy, Lo tita'ev adomi ki achi hahu. Do not abhor the Edomite, since he is your brother. It is blunt. The Torah recognizes our instinct. We might want to hate someone, a part of the extended family who has rejected the covenant of God, but that attitude is not on the table. Asav remains part of our family. I think there's a reading of Asav available to us that's more positive than what we've traditionally embraced. We can't spurn Asav, the Torah says. Why not embrace him? Learn from him. We're inclined to view Asav disfavorably because of the curse that promises, Ve'al charbecha tichyeh. You shall live, and he shall live by the sword. Many midrashim in a few places say that Edom was actually offered the covenant with God, but they said, we have been promised to live by the sword. How can we fulfill the Torah? But that blessing, the curse, quasi-curse, was foisted upon Asav. What he actually wanted was the initial blessing. He wanted in his own lifetime, more than anything, to fulfill God's covenant with his father of receiving a blessing for all of Isaac's descendants. I suspect that a key factor in our tradition's ongoing denigration of Asav, is the need to contrast Jacob favorably with him. Can we resist that zero-sum approach? Could we pause that agenda of hating Asav and do our best to learn from the characters just on their own merits, in their own context? There is a case for raising up Asav instead. I know it's unusual to say that we should learn from Asav, but it's also what our tradition asks of us. The famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avot teaches us, Ezehu chacham halomed mikol adam, who is wise, one who learns from every person. I'll offer you my own commentary on this verse in the Midrashic rabbinic tradition. Al tikri Adam, ela Edom. Do not read Adam, a person, but rather read it as Edom, Asav. Ezehu acham halomen mikol Edom. Who is wise? A person who is willing to learn even from Asav. GTS has helped me solidify a twofold mission statement for what I want to do in the Jewish world and for my rabbinate. One, lehagdil Torah ulehadira, to magnify Torah and to beautify it and to help others. Number two, to be a source of blessing. The former, magnifying Torah, I've learned over the last 5 years means forcing ourselves to be open to Torah wherever we might find it, even if it emerges from someone like Asav with whom we have our real qualms. The latter, helping everyone be a source of blessing, means recognizing that we need to take after Asav a little bit and claim that our core inheritance as children of Abraham is to strive always to be a blessing above all else, to live a spiritual life, and to be a blessing to others. Halomed mikol Edom. May we all merit to yearn for a life of blessing, just like Asav. Kaddish Rabbanan. Yitgadal v'yikadash shemei Rabbah. Ve'alma divra kirutei ve'amlich malchutei. Chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael b'agala uvizman kariv v'imru amen. Yirei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam omer maya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei d'kudisha b'rechu. Me'ila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata d'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Al Yisrael ve'al Rabbanan ve'al Talmidei ve'al kol Talmidei ve'al kol man de'oskin be'oraita diva atra hadein v'di v'chol atar ve'atar yehi lechon u'lechon shlam araba china v'chista v'rachamin v'chayin arichin mezona revicha Rafur kana min kodam avuhon divishmaya v'imru amen. Yehi shlam araba min shemaya v'chaim tovim alinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav hu b'rachamav yaseh shalom alinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Amen.